as it relates to the area around the Superdome, so it was easy for people to get to the convention center.
I saw a guy at Nicholson Boulevard who retired from a newspaper, a disabled guy, walked with a cane, had diabetes, sitting there in the hot sun for 3 days. He was in bad shape.
20, 30,000 people just in the streets. I mean, it was everywhere. People were everywhere.
No food, no water. I mean, if there's a devil, when we get paid, they won't even bring clothes. They won't bring food. Where's people? Where's the bed?
Mother is 83 years old. She's in dire need of her heart medication. There's no medical services here. She's on the floor. She's dying right now. She needs help to get her out of here.
The direct address suddenly interpolates us again, so many years afterwards. We who watched it at the time, who couldn't intervene, but also knowing all of the others who were watching and refused to intervene. The procedures and processes that weren't in place to ensure people could leave New Orleans, and if they didn't leave, that they could be supported within the city after the deluge. The objective view of abjection and the authority of the interviewees, who are Eddie Compass, the former New Orleans chief of police, and the New Orleans newspaper editor, David, are sources of knowledge that they give way to the direct address to camera that the documentary remediates at the demand for help, but which we know is not being answered, hence challenging us with the question, what are we to you that you do not help us? Here, I suggest, erupts the real of trauma and the abject in Giulio Cristelli's terms. It's this movement that's set up, and that those who were left in New Orleans were the abject of the USA. The abject. But moving on to another aspect of the discussion I want to present now. I'm going to shift slightly to some other theory. Walter Benjamin, as concerned to break with traditional notions of history, writes, but the historical index of the images not only says that they belong to a particular time, it says above all that they attain legibility only at a particular time. And indeed, this acceding to legibility constitutes a specific critical point in the movement of their interior. Every present day is determined by the images that are synchronic with it. Each now is the now of a particular recognizability. In it, truth is charged to the bursting point with time. The image that is read, which is to say, the image in the now of its recognizability, bears to the highest degree the imprint of the perilous critical moment on which all reading is founded. And to go on, it is not that what is past casts its light on what is present, or what is present its light on what is past. Rather, images that wherein what has been comes together in a flash with the now to form a constellation. This is a very different idea of now time, but I want to draw upon it in two ways. In relation to the now of the readability of an image, and a recorded time in film. And secondly, in relation to the idea of the interpenetration of past and present and future, rather than a causal determination of the past on the present and future. Here in my discussion, I want to connect the flashback to the issue of time and memory, and film's ability to engage us in thinking differently, which was central to Benjamin, Bergson, and Deleuze. The term flashback, which had been first used in the 19th century in the novel, is certainly an English novel, in the sense of a memory coming upon one in a flash. It was later used to refer to the experience of trauma victims, of a return of a visual or auditory memory of the traumatic event, as with World War I soldiers who fell victim to shell shock. Or it would refer more usually to a memory that is charged with painful affect of the traumatic event, but does not ostensibly appear to be connected. The term comes up in cinema studies, in film, to refer to flashing back to something that diegetically we understand, the before of the storytelling. But the flashback that I'm talking about here is involuntary, charged with affect, a pure perception in Bergson or Deleuze that cannot be made into a recollection. Or in Freud's terms, Nachträglichkeit, or retroaction, deferred action, or as the analyst Jean Leplanche has argued, afterwardsness. And there is here a repetition in relation to the unconscious as well as conscious wish to see or know again, to return and to repeat in relation to both the remembered and forgotten, and the unremembered, the unrememberable. So embedded here for me is something that draws on Lacan's concept of the real as the unrepresentable, the other thought, that which opens a gap in the symbolic, in our understanding, and insofar as we can acknowledge it, it demands a thinking otherwise. The use of flashback always introduces the very fiction of time in cinema, and which, when made palpable, also introduces what Deleuze has called the power of the false. And this is my argument to connect the two. Deleuze shows how the time image is an apprehension made possible by film when it frees depicted time from the temporal causality of cinematic representation as a chronological succession from then to now. The direct time image, Deleuze writes, always gives us access to that Proustian dimension where people and things occupy a place in time which is incommensurable with the one they have in space. Time image 2, page 39. It is a work of memory and of mourning, of a before and after, but where there is no separation. And Deleuze says, as they coexist with the image, as they are inseparable from the image. Deleuze sees this as a process of becoming, not only within the film's images and sounds, but also within the spectator in her apprehension of an incommensurability of the reference and its temporality, and thus the introduction of an undecidability. And it seems to me that's central to every time image, this undecidability. It's never workable out. This, of course, relates to his distinction between a rational interval and an irrational interval. The latter being a juxtaposition that produces association that is not already thought, that is not organized to prompt a certain order of connection, however unsuccessfully. Instead, in the irrational interval, there is a becoming thought that is not internal to the juxtaposition, but a potential, a virtuality. What is introduced by this outsideness of thinking is a series of possibilities, and thus a series of times in which these virtual possibles might be actualized. That is, become. The irrational interval no longer divides a before from an after, but suspends us in a state of uncertainty, where it is impossible to know or predict in advance which direction the change will take. It produces an image of becoming rather than being. Thus it includes hesitation and uncertainty and suspense as to what might be possible, but which can never be fully resolved by the actual thought we are led to. The irrational interval of the time image is the meanwhile of that during or within the time which intervenes. Here I want to draw again on Walter Benjamin. Slide? Yes. Quoting. The notion, he says, the notion of a present which is not a transition, but in which time stands still and has come to a stop. He speaks of this as pointing to the importance of stilling an interval in the movement of time as action. He argues that, and I quote, materialist historiography is based on a constructive principle. Thinking involves not only the flow of thoughts, but their arrest as well. Where thinking suddenly stops in a configuration pregnant with tensions, it gives that configuration a shock by which it crystallizes into a moment. For Benjamin, this enables what he terms the blasting open of the continuum of history, that is, of historical time as a movement of cause and effect. The historical object appears in a new setting, described more recently by British philosopher Andrew Benjamin as the explosive now time, I'm quoting, the instantiation of the present by montage, by the movement of the montage, an effect whose determinations are yet to be fixed. It will be montage, means cinema montage, that involves temporality as well as objects and images. This is the connection that I wanted to make here. Film, both documentary and fiction, interrelates times and hence places, showing simultaneous events. There is a demand on us to think, however, both this and that together, bringing the idea of connection or its absence into play in an interval that is never fully rational. And here is a process of becoming which cannot be represented as such, but only apprehended through the imaginative work of spectatorship. It isn't in the image only, it's also in us. Here we have a world that the spectator sees, a documentary world or a fiction world, juxtaposed to other remembered realities, sheets of time and peaks of present in Zeller's terms. Unplotted, the meanwhile of contingent reality pervades documentary. It is the aim of cinema verite, of direct film, Zeller's declared, and I quote, not to achieve a real as it would exist independently of the image, but to achieve a before and an after as they coexist with the image, as they are inseparable from the image. The documents the past represented figure both an historical reality and the real, of the uncanny. That moment for Freud when the distinction, and I quote, between imagination and reality is suddenly effaced. So for Freud and Lacan, with Naturlichkeit or retroaction, there is a return to repeat and to remember the forgotten. This is not what is underneath and is determining what is on top, but rather how what is on top, our conscious, is a continuing work of reinterpreting the before of the underneath, in which chance is always central. The meaning of earlier events is not fixed, awaiting discovery, rediscovery or activation. Rather, it is incomplete and enigmatic, and thus open to retranslation, which is the French's term. My example here, we're now back to the is an extraordinary work. Jill Godmiller is a wonderful documentary filmmaker, and in 1980 she was asked by Joseph Grotowski to make a film with him on his return to the village that he lived in as a child during the Second World War in order to escape the Nazis in the city. Grotowski is a very important Polish theatre director, dates 1933 to 1959. And what I wanted to present here is the remembering of Grotowski and this work of a palimpsest, if you like, a writing on the reality that's documented. This is a performance work. Grotowski went back to the village without having told anyone he was coming. Speaking to Jill Godmiller, she confirms that this is how it worked. He completely controlled what she was doing, she said, which isn't quite true because she was directing how the camera is moving and is being used. I'll just show the opening of the film.
So, here, from my born, from the town where I was born, Rzeszów is 20 kilometers in this direction. And I arrived here with my mother and my brother in 40, without having nothing, just with the empty hands, without the money, in the very big poverty. And here I was born in some way the second time in this village. All essential motives in my life started here. Before it was the destruction, after it was something further. I started my life inside the peasant family. Dziecka ja byłem, kiedy mnie znałaś.
Wracałam z miasta, za drzwi wyskakiwałeś, bandyta, napady robić.
Direct sound in both languages.
So, I see one very old man, but he's
now his voice over in English.
deaf. Yeah. Bo tu moja matka, I have in my memory the name of one of my teachers of the school, Young. But in my memories he was killed in the time of the Nazis, the German pacification. But he said he is living. He is not, he is near. He lives now in the house, not very far from this. But I don't believe, I think that he said about some other young.
Even the village when we was in the time of the war was pacificated. So the big part of the people with old family was killed. It was a matter of accident who will be killed. And we was waiting. But in this kind of the situation, my mother had still the incredible serenity in the moment of the danger. She dominated the situation by some kind of serenity. In the moment when the Nazi soldier was going into the home, it was a crucial moment. Will we be killed or not? She was completely serene and normal. She spoke German. And she said to him that nothing interests is in this house. With some kind of smiling and very big business. And it worked. It was not first time. She had incredible force in the situation of Daniel. Now jest telewizja.
Ja jestem Kotowski.
Ja jestem młodszym synem, Jurek.
Okay. Using the, remembering this is a man who becomes a theatre director and the gesture and performance are central to his work. So this anecdote that he tells us is carefully chosen. It's about his own life. And as you heard earlier, he's gone back to this village to find out again how he was born the second time. Something happened in this village that made him who he was. This sequence, however, is extraordinary. He's meeting the school teacher, the one that he's killed off in his memory.
Młodszy syn. Bardzo świetnie. Ja pamiętam, że ja pana bardzo kochałem, panu nauczycielu. Pamiętam, jak pan wzięli. Coś sobie kojarzę, że po rękach wzięli, że transformowali po rękach. Chcę pokazać ręce. Coś takiego było. W 44 roku? Chyba wcześniej, nie wiem kiedy pana wzięli. Może w 44? Wiem, że panowie widzieli. Panowie widzieli.
The question about in what way he was not killed. He's no more the teacher. And he takes the post, elected post of the children's village. I said to him before that I very loved him when he was my teacher.
I hope you heard that. He says, I told him I really loved him and he was my teacher. And yet he killed him off. So, moving on to my next. I'm not going to change the slide to see this going quicker. I want to, with that film, I hope it's an example of, there's no flashback in it. It's about remembering. But it's also about a misremembering that gets remade in a performance in real time. It's a reality TV show made in 1980 of just going there and doing something. My other two examples are rather different, and they both draw on the digital. This is Dark Glass by my colleague, both of them are by my colleagues who are brilliant filmmakers, by Clive Barnard. It was commissioned by the Arts Council, and it was made on a camera phone, a very upmarket camera phone. Dark Glass. Is it up? Dark Glass enacts scenes filmed in a continuous take on a mobile phone with an unstaged or found location, which seems to flash back to scenes spoken of by the documentary voiceover that remembers. So we have a voiceover speaking. The voiceover text is a performance by an actress, but she is speaking the words produced by a woman in hypnosis. So the words themselves are documentary evidence in hypnosis. The words spoken are tied to reality in the event of the hypnosis and its time of the speaking, but also to the real, to trauma and an unrepresentable. What we see, however, is actual, namely a field, a child, a farm, a house, a moving world captured by this mobile phone in a continuous take. Handheld, its movements are very marked. The camera's movements are very marked, suggesting both the subjectivity of a look and a sense of freedom of movement, as if embodying the mind of the voice we listen to. But the relation of the scene to the voiceover is a fiction. It is not a documentary reenactment. Deleuze writes that it is hypnosis which reveals thought to itself. Dark Glass, however, implicates us as spectators. It invokes the possibility of a truth of speech to be discovered in the images the voiceover appears to speak of. But as the title alerts us, the images cannot effect a revelation. In their relation to the spoken is a lure, a game, a deception, trying to make a fit between them. We are confronted by discontinuity and discrepancy. Two times are present. But while, as viewers, we become involved in a drama of meaning, of understanding what happened in the past, that is, in the events, the words spoken, which index an experiencing a contingent and present tense happening of involuntary recollection in the voiceover. But the story we encounter, inasmuch as it is a story, is not simply the account produced under hypnosis and now reenacted, but I suggest the narration of the film as a work of representation. Barnard, the filmmaker. In other words, we're trying to make sense of this film all the time, moving between the story of hypnosis and the story of the images. And of course, this is a real-time single take. Barnard, the filmmaker, was however, herself the subject of the hypnosis that we are listening to, and from which the speech that her film reenacts was drawn. What is fashioned here is not a reparative storytelling that unifies the teller and the told, but a telling of their disunity, the split of the subject and representation, figuratively as fascinating repetition. So this makes it clear in the opening of the film. See what you think.
Tell me what it is you're seeing at the moment. I think it might be an image from a photograph. She's in sunglasses and a headscarf sitting on a beach. She's kind of concerned, sad. Her brow is furrowed. Would you like to speak to her? Is she saying anything to you? What's your sense of her?
There's a bit of performance.
For her?
Yeah.
Would you like to stay with this image, or would you like to find another one? Okay. Are you seeing anything?
I'm seeing this friend I had when I was 10.
Can you describe her to me?
Long, straight, dark hair. And kind of a brown face and smiling brown eyes.
Is she a good friend?
I hope you get a chance to see the whole, it's about 7 minutes long. Here, the first images don't match what she's saying, and now we move to an image which does match what she's saying. And it's in this movement and discrepancy that we're played with by the film in making sense of what the story is behind what she's remembering. And we're moving between a reality, a documentary reality, and a fiction, all in a certain kind of real time. So, my last example takes me to my colleague, Perestroika, Change, Sarah Turner's film from 2009. Also shot on digital film, which was refilmed as still, was partly refilmed as still footage. And she uses video cam footage that she filmed 20 years earlier. The filmmaker is retracing a journey made 20 years before on the Trans-Siberian Railway to the mysterious Lake of Baikal, the deepest lake in the world. That expedition, which she filmed, was the last she made with her dearest friend, Sean, who was to die suddenly soon afterwards in a cycling accident. What we see are the images and sounds recorded by Sarah on these two train journeys, which are recorded actuality. The one as flashback, the other as an outtime. But the voiceover is a fiction. In other words, the words of Dark Love. Is a fiction of another woman recovering from a bike accident and trying to return a memory. It is a ghost story of the USSR then and of Russia now, of a landscape, Lake Baikal, and of an emotional history of Lake Baikal, which is dying, as you may be aware, in terms of pollution, and of an emotional history of death and its losses, and a living with loss. The film engages as poetry, the time image of the irrational interval, and as sheets of time. But it is also a palimpsest, the reworked visuals a magic writing pad, so that our engagement is an activity of translation, detranslation, and retranslation, not simply of our protagonist, the Sarah, the voice of her, but of the enigma of the film as an audiovisual encounter. That's my argument. So I hope this will illustrate the issues of remembering and of time and the past. I've got two small clips that I'm using from this work.
It was important to repeat it 20 years to the day, and it was equally important for you to be here with me. So, we're doing this because it was my project before the accident, and since the accident, you've worked for months to realise it. For you, these recordings are a document of process, the journey of recovery that we'll reconstruct when we get back home. For me, they're a document of
Sean, can you shut the door, please? Okay, right?
Is on film the KGB are going to take away her cassettes?
Then we can see it doesn't sound sleeping.
Also, as you observe, your cassettes are low. My lord, she'll be alright with some yes. Yeah, we're very many useful things in here. So, as I can say.
Yes, Sean. I timed up the cabinet, as you can see. Does it matter if I miss it when I'm filming? Yes. Why? Without the image of the thing, I can't remember the feeling, and without the feeling, I can't remember the moment. This is what we're doing here. This is the project. You want us to look at the archive together. You want to see how it feels different. Different to now. Or different to this. And the images from that time are important. They're a record. A fact of something that I went through then. But I don't want to look at the past. If I'm looking at the past, I can't hold earlier. And I can't hold earlier because I'm thinking about this. And then I can't hold now. I can't hold now. I can't even hold this. Fir trees. More fir trees. A small house. A train passes. The problem is encoding. The problem is retrieval. I've had months of being tested on these things. A small house. Another train. What kind of train? There's been loads of trains. Then you're back and you're smiling sweetly. You kiss me. You can see that I'm panicking. You don't know that I'm panicking because I'm saying these things. But I wasn't saying them then. I was just thinking them. Now I've said them. And I can't let you hear them. Because when you kiss me, you look right into me and say, it's amazing, isn't it? Amazing that we're doing this. Isn't it amazing that we're able to be here?
The Festival of Memory and its archive and our own images and recordings are stored in the film. Thank you. That was my closing clip. And